Who's in the NFL here? You? You? How about you, Tim? You, Tim.
CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
Hey, it's your boy Pharrell. I'm a huge fan of Tim Graham and Friends. Then again, who isn't? Shake it, ooh.
It's Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants, and of course, our newest partner, Homage. And if you are a Knicks fan, whether you came to be during their finals run or have always been a Knicks fan, Homage has a lot of great Knicks gear that you can get with a discount through Tim Graham and Friends. Just click on the link that's in the comments right below this YouTube video, if that's where you're watching, or if you're listening on your various platforms. Check social media, Twitter and Blue Sky, and we put the link there so you can go right to Homage's newest stuff for the Knicks championship. All kinds of gear, t-shirts, sweatpants. Put your infant in a onesie that says, that honors the Knicks championship run, whatever it is that tickles your fancy. Jonah, that was a great NBA final for a series that ended 4-1. I think that if you were looking back 20 years from now and trying to learn about this series, if you didn't watch it with your own two eyes, you'd think, oh, gee, 4-1. Pretty lopsided, but every game was a nail biter and historic in some fashion. Even the Knicks loss with the president in attendance, and then the comebacks in the other games. I don't know. I know that you love your basketball. What was your takeaway from the NBA Finals?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, every single game had the San Antonio Spurs taking a double-digit lead in the first quarter, and that includes the 4 games they lost and the game they won, and giving back the lead. The Knicks came back and actually took the lead in the fourth quarter of that game that the Spurs ultimately pulled out, or I think it got tied. But anyways, so same script in every single game and competitive throughout the second half of every game, even though the wins and losses in the series wasn't a close series. They were close games. The Spurs led for more than 70% of the time on the floor, even in a series that they lost 4 out of 5 games. And the combination of major market, one of the blue blood NBA markets, and a team that hadn't won a championship in 53 years, and all the
All the celebrities.
Right. We said that in unison, like we knew what we were doing there. Made it a very star-laden NBA Finals and television event for the 5 games. I was rooting for a longer series, in part because I wanted to see that Game 6 in MSG with more and more celebrities and more old Knicks and more New York sports connections. And I do think,
and let's see how high the prices could get for the tickets. That was part of the pageantry of this series, was the tickets being so expensive and so many people wanting to be there for history.
Right. Yeah, I actually didn't like that aspect of, how hard it was to get into the building for a normal Knicks fan. I hope there were season ticket holders that were able to get in at a more affordable price from being longtime Knicks fans and having that equity invested in the team as it is with the Sabres. how there weren't really watch party situations, and there were different layers to that with, Trump and James Dolan and the mayor and different political aspects of New York that contributed to that. I didn't like that. It would have been nice if it was an MSG packed mostly with Knicks fans, celebrities on the floor, and diehards in the stands, and millions of more Knicks fans outside. But before the series, I kind of wanted to note that I thought, this isn't a Buffalo team or a Buffalo championship. It's not the closest NBA franchise to Buffalo. Toronto and Cleveland are closer. It's not even the only New York team right now, but it's historically the New York team, and historically, or at least since Madison Square Garden Network has been, on television, and there's been an MSG channel available on cable in Buffalo. Pretty much every Knicks game has been on local Buffalo television for more than 30 years, and I think there's a lot of Knicks fans in Buffalo who either maybe came from New York City or have families that were Knicks fans going back, or just by seeing the Knicks on TV over and over and over again, I'm at MSG, which is, the television home of the Sabres as well, turned Western New Yorkers into Knicks fans or had them adopt Knicks culture. And Knicks culture was a lot like Bills culture, Bills fan culture. They don't call themselves the Knicks Mafia, but it has a lot of the same type energy. And being able to watch that and experience that and take part in that, I think was fun. So I thought before the finals that Buffalo fans should be rooting for the Knicks and enjoying this NBA Finals run, and it played out that way for anybody that chose to do that. And I think a lot of Buffalo fans did watch that and think, this was pretty cool to see the New York Knicks win this championship.
You mentioned that this is not even the only New York team, making reference to the Brooklyn Nets. Did you see Chuck D's tweet regarding the Brooklyn Nets?
I didn't say that, but I'll say somebody told me this years ago, and it's definitely true. They said the biggest problem with the Brooklyn Nets is they have no fans. Nobody roots for the Nets. They're all Knicks fans in New York. There's no Brooklyn Nets fans outside of New York. I shouldn't say none, but there really aren't. And that it's a team with no fan base. They do play in New York City, in Brooklyn, in a beautiful arena, and they draw spectators, but they're all Knicks fans or rooting for the other team. There's really no diehard Brooklyn Nets fans. I challenge anybody that listens to this
Well,
podcast to come out and tell us that they're a Nets fan and why and how. I should say I do know some particular Nets fans, being that uh, you know Matt McDonald, Mike McDonald's oldest son, is general manager of the Nets G League
well,
team in Long Island.
What Chuck D said on Twitter was his proposal was if they were to move, they should move to Buffalo because it would
Oh, I didn't see
honor
that.
the Braves and Rochester. He was even talking about the ABA aspect of, he did, I don't know that he specifically mentioned Rochester, but he's like, there's at least, some sort of, nod that you could make. I mean, let's use the word homage again, homage t-shirts, which we're wearing, by the way. And a quick aside, I'm wearing my Little Kings cream ale shirt again. We talked about it the first time I wore my Little Kings shirt of, I don't know, 2 months ago, that it was made in Cincinnati. I grew up drinking some Little Kings. It is made, I've been looking for it. If there's somebody out there that comes across Little Kings, send me a note. Let me know where I can find it. I've checked at Consumers and a couple other places, but if you come across Little Kings, they're in green bottles, they're splits, they're sold in either an 8-pack or a 10-pack. Let me know where I can find it. Anyways, so anyway, Chuck D was saying to move the Nets to Buffalo. Chuck D being the
I mean,
lead of Public Enemy for those who aren't in the hip hop scene and know who Chuck D is, but it was a pretty cool thing to see on social media.
that would be wonderful, tremendous for all the Buffalo sports fans, basketball fans.
It wouldn't
Would
work.
even be kind of neat. Well, that's where I was going with this. I mean, what if the team did play 10 of their games in Rochester? They played some games in Syracuse, so it was kind of a team for all of upstate, traveling New York, the New York Nets, even though they play in 6 different arenas,
Right.
spread across the state. But I don't think the Buffalo market works for the NBA right now. I'm not so sure
It can't
an
share the
NBA
NHL
team.
and the NBA.
Right, right, right. At the same time, uh, woodwork, the television market is not something the NBA covets. So I do think Buffalo sports fans uh, really do have to choose. They don't have to choose, but if you want a team to root for, you really do got to pick between, the Raptors, the Cavaliers. I guess you could pick any team, but the local rooting interest, you do have the opportunity probably to pick between 3 teams. There's a strong case for the Knicks. You could choose the Nets. So that could be 4 teams. Every one of their games is on the Yes Network. or Toronto, which I think a lot of fans have picked up on, and Cleveland as well. In Cleveland, you might be getting LeBron back for 1 or 2 more years. LeBron and Bronny, both Ohio natives.
The regarding the Sabres and Braves and how Buffalo became an NHL city. I think you have to lament, or if you think if they could have held on just a little bit longer, the Braves would have reached the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Dr. J era of the NBA, where it got really fun. Had they held on there, maybe things would be different, and Buffalo would be an NBA town instead of an NHL town. But you can blame the priests at Canisius College and Niagara University for not wanting to give up their basketball dates for, I guess, the Little Three more than the Big Four at the time, playing those games at Alumni Arena, or excuse me, at the Odd, not Alumni Arena, at the Odd. And the Sabres had second pick, and the Braves always had last pick, and they had to move so they could get some dates that were better for the gate, and end up becoming the San Diego Clippers, then the LA Clippers. We're in that mode right now of in between when it comes to Sabres and Bills. And we're waiting for Bills training camp. That is the next big thing that will happen. All apologies to the Buffalo Bisons and for whatever they got going on downtown. But when it comes to sports in Western New York, training camp is next up. And it's an interesting time because only 7 practices at St. John Fisher University. Those are going to begin in late July. And by comparison, I went back and looked. Doug Marrone, his first year as Bills head coach, they were at training camp from July 28th to August 21st. That's a long time. But in his second year, they actually expanded, and they reported on July 18th and went until August 21st. So a month plus out at St. John Fisher. Rex Ryan was similar. July 31st to August 25th. And then Sean McDermott came in and immediately lopped off a week. As you may recall, people were writing about how Sean McDermott doesn't like to go away. That was the story that got out. He never said that. It never came out of his mouth. But people who knew Sean McDermott and were talking to Sean McDermott's people and about his vision as a head coach, as a first-time head coach with the Buffalo Bills, was to keep things more in-house and on-site and not going away. Well, I think that there was immediate pushback from the sponsors, all the people who spend money on the signage out there at St. John Fisher, and whatever, gestures that are made towards the season ticket holders based in the Rochester area, all that outreach that was necessary back in the day when Russ Brandon first implemented the St. John Fisher training camp in the year 2000. To help bolster a season ticket base when it was desperately needed. Not nearly as much anymore, and now the focus is going to Canada anyway. But now we have, but anyway, Sean McDermott quickly changed his, or corrected, or made any kind of, wanted to erase any thought that he was against St. John Fisher. And there was always, wink and a nod. No, we love it out there. We need it out there. Well, here they are. It keeps getting whittled down. Sean McDermott did whittle it down as time went on, even though he was deferential and said all these nice things. But now here, Joe Brady is the head coach, 7 practices out at St. John Fisher. I'm interested, though, in what it's going to look like out there because of what we saw at voluntary with voluntary practices. That's what I call OTAs, because every time you say OTA, people have to stop and think. Now, what does that stand for real quick? Is that the mandatory? Is that the voluntary? So I just go ahead and say voluntary practices. I try not to say OTAs at all because it's just a football term that people have to stop and deconstruct to figure out what it is. Voluntary practices.
Also, calling them organized team activities implies that just about everything they also do is an unorganized team activity.
Right, or informal. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So there's that. And then mandatory minicamp. Now, I was not at mandatory minicamp, but I was at the voluntary practices that were open to the media. And I would say that the mood, everybody wants to talk about how different it is under Joe Brady as it compared to Sean McDermott. I think that the voluntary workouts were really loose. I've talked about it on WGR. I even wrote about it at The Athletic. You know, the music that is played at these practices was blue. I mean, it was raunchy, and I'm no prude. But you could make out the lyrics, and it's end this, F that. Um, I can say it here on this podcast that I can't on the air, but one of the lyrics from a Meek Mill song was um, sucking and fucking and swallowing for $1 that I plainly heard with my own ears. I didn't even have to look it up. I mean, and then we're talking amongst ourselves like, well, how are they playing? I mean, there are houses right here. There are ladies here that don't work for the team who are guests. I mean, what's going to happen when the Make-A-Wish kid shows up, you know? So it was just a lot of the players seemed to be very much in their glory. And you used the reference to me once that it was like the substitute teacher. But what's your take, Jonah, on this vibe? And can we project what we may see in this abbreviated St. John Fisher um, 7 practice sojourn for training camp versus what we've seen so far out of a Joe Brady run operation?
So I'll start with, you know, the substitute teacher remark was something we agreed upon when I mentioned it. And this
Yeah,
was before minicamp, after
right.
the period of voluntary OTAs, and it came off the cuff when a friend of ours on F of the show kind of asked what it was like, and I think we threw a few words out there, and then that one came out, and it was like, yeah, it does feel that kind of way.
That's
It's
the one that
been
resonated with
looser.
me. I was like, yeah, I wish I'd thought of that, but
Everybody
that's
seems
is what it
like
seems
they're
like.
having a good time. There wasn't 100% participation, so it did feel a lot more like a voluntary workout, you know, open gym kind of vibe. Even if they were organized
Another
on-field
great,
activities, but
another
you know,
great
it
metaphor.
was different. It was different than the OTAs had really ever felt. I think with Sean McDermott and going back to previous coaches, maybe it wasn't all that different than how some coaches that have been here in the past have run off-season activities or any coaches around the league. But I think the vibe shifted noticeably for the mandatory minicamp. First, everybody was there. Everybody seemed to be taking it very seriously, or as seriously as they should at this point in time. You know, there's no contact allowed. I even saw a couple plays where the defensive players got a little bit, you know, too aggressive for the setting, but that's kind of a good thing in that situation. It was competitive. The music was different. I don't know if they heard you talk about it on the radio and that got back, but you know, but there was a different uh, turn of the dial on the radio station for the music. There were different visitors. You know, Lindy Ruff and Jarmo Kekalainen were there for a day. Laura Pagula was there for a day. There were more friends of the team around, I think, than in the OTAs at some points. Yeah, there were some of those at the OTAs. The Pioneer football team, the flag football team that won the state championship, was out there for most of the practice. One of the practices was indoors due to the weather, and there's a different structure and differences from what we can see and music wise and things are a lot different when they practice indoors. But I would say I think training camp's going to be quite similar to what this mini camp was from that vibe perspective. And it was a lot more business-like and a lot more competitive, really. And everybody, except for some players that were dealing with some injuries, was on the field competing for the duration of the mini camp. They didn't cancel the last day, although it was a walkthrough session. So things are, the off-season program does seem to be lightened up by, you know, a marginal amount, not very much, but it does seem to be a lightening of the workload so far this offseason. Training camp will be shorter, although they'll go back to the stadium and do training camp schedule practices, we believe, for a few weeks after that. But it does seem to be a more serious offseason than I was given it credit for following the OTAs, but a little bit of a lighter workload.
I'm curious who's going to snap these guys to attention when it's necessary, because it will be necessary as it is with every team. Great teams, weak teams, young teams, old teams, doesn't matter. Nothing is going to be perfect. especially when you have a first-time head coach and a first-time NFL defensive coordinator. They're both on the young side. And their personalities, we hear from them, Ed Oliver saying, going on about how Joe Brady's the coolest white guy he knows. He's got the fade and he's going on and on about how cool he is. And Pete Carmichael does not seem as though he's the type of guy who's going to peel the paint off the walls. And we hear about Jim Leonard. They call him how silent he is, how quiet he is in meetings, that he sits in the back of the room and he's more of a observer than he is. And so far, I mean, we don't know. We're going to see the whole rainbow of emotions once practices get going in earnest and games are played and the shit hits the fan. But I mean, is 70-plus-year-old John Fox going to be? I mean, who's the guy? Josh Allen himself. I mean, he's conflict averse. I mean, he's kind of known for, we talk about him being the Labrador Retriever, right? He's like, he wants everybody to get along and let's go play ball and be bros. And think, so it's just a curiosity I have. I'm not going to say that the team's going to start off with trouble or, but, what happens when they lose a couple games? Every year, Sean McDermott, which one of the great stats, by the way, and I know I've said it on this podcast before, but it's just amazing that once the Bills started winning division titles, they would lose back-to-back games once and exactly once every year under Sean McDermott, and then they would never lose a third in a row, and then they'd never lose two in a row again. So, which is amazing to me. But it's about the resiliency of what happens. So Sean McDermott's teams all lost two games in a row every year. What's going to happen when this team loses two, or maybe it gets to the third, or they have a stretch where they can't string a couple of wins together? Maybe they win, lose, win, lose. I don't know. When things start to get a little tight, I'm curious how Joe Brady's personality emerges. That guy who was standing in front of us at the introductory news conference, and when he looked at his players, started to get choked up. Not unlike Terry Pagula looking at Gilbert Perreault and starting to cry when he bought the Sabres. I mean, Joe Brady loves his dudes. He loves his guys, and that is viewed as a strength. I'm curious, and based on the looseness that I saw at the voluntary practices, I didn't go to the mandatory mini like you did, but I don't know who's going to yank the leash when it needs to be yanked. And I'm fascinated to see what happens there.
Well, I think the answer to your question, you did answer, is Joe Brady. He is in the role now where he has to be, the dean of discipline for this football team. It's not going to be, John Fox. He's not in any authoritative position on the team. That would
He's
be a
along for the ride.
Well, he's an advisor to Joe Brady. He might help Joe Brady decide the right times and the right ways to push the right buttons. I think that's his role, but he shouldn't be doing that himself. Joe Brady's been in a somewhat authoritative position on the team as the offensive coordinator. You would assume he has had to call players and coach players in meetings and video sessions, in his previous jobs with the Bills and other teams. The question is how effective he's going to be. And Sean McDermott had remarkable success with the discipline on the team, being able to be hard on the team. He'd talk about, hard weeks of practice when they needed it and the team rising to that occasion and not really fighting him on that. We didn't hear too many opportunities of that. And
a clear separation of church and state when it came to, I can pal around with you here and we can make snow angels and do all these things as he loosened up towards the end, but he was still the no doubt man in charge. And that's not to say Joe Brady he also is the no doubt man in charge, but will the players buy into that?
Right. And what I was saying is that Sean McDermott would coach the team hard at times. And there were times in few instances you could probably point out where certain players might not have liked his coaching tactics or were on the outs, but those were very, very few. He had most of the team and most all of the important players on the team following his lead and having his back no matter how hard he coached them. And that takes a unique skill set. And I think there's a lot of Bills fans that are excited about the coaching change because they can look at specific weaknesses Sean McDermott had on game days or whoever his philosophies and think Joe Brady's going to do things different or do things better. And there will be areas he does that. But this seems like one of the areas where we don't think Joe Brady at his age and his career in coaching is as strong of a disciplined coach as Sean McDermott was. And the Bills probably are going to give some of that back this season. This might be a situation where Joe Brady learns how to be better and more effective as a disciplinarian in year one, and he's better at that in year two and three, and so on and so forth. But I do think that's an area where the Bills are going to take maybe some side steps or small step backwards this season. It might not mean the team is any worse. You know, they might make gains in other ways and have a better year or just as good of a year. But I do think there'll be crisis points this season where we get to see how Joe Brady's discipline program is working with this team, with this group that was used to a different coach and a different style and different, the Bills are going to need some internal leadership, I think, for discipline. That's going to have to be Josh Allen's role at some points in time, maybe more than it used to be.
And Brandon Beane, who's also kind of, I think in general he's viewed as more of a player's guy than a rigid, we've seen the pictures of him at the Kentucky Derby with his, the players, and I don't know. I get a sense that he's more of a player's guy than a
Well, yes, but I
than a
would say,
rigid executive.
wouldn't that be alarming if Brandon Beane is in the locker room or taking a disciplinarian role any more than he used to with Sean McDermott? If he's assumed more power and exercising his power in different ways or expanded ways, I don't think that would be good for the dynamics of this team, this locker room, or anything going into this season. Would you?
Well, it all depends on how it would shake out and how it's done. There's a lot of diplomacy that's involved with this type of thing, and um, how clear it is, what the messaging is internally from leadership to the players. Um, but yeah, I think that the locker room is, Sean McDermott was never in the locker room. I mean, that's his thing. Like, that's for the players. And I think that's common for coaches. And same thing with the general manager. I don't know. I think that we're all just guessing, but this is what happens when you have a change like this, especially when you go from somebody who was known for being a little tightly wound, especially in the beginning of his career, not so much at the end, but Sean McDermott's first impression still kind of hovered of being a hard ass, and stuck with especially some of the players that were around for a bit. But I didn't see as much of a hard ass at the end. I'm thinking about the end of the Pittsburgh Steelers game when they were playing without Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins, and Alec Anderson and Ryan Vandemark go in there, and they shut out the Steelers defense on the sack and quarterback hits and all this stuff, and they had a great game and blew the Steelers out, and on the road, no less, a week after the Houston Texans just terrorized Josh Allen, and just Alec Anderson grabbing Sean McDermott and giving him a bear hug and pulling him up off the ground and fuck yeah, fuck. I mean, maybe Sean McDermott didn't drop the F bomb, but there he loosened him. He was, it wasn't just a quick, way to go, boys. Good job, boys. He was a different guy towards the end, but I think still compared to Joe Brady, who's really, leaning into and embracing, I think, a player's coach mentality because it is, and in at least in some part because it's different and they want it to be different and they want the players, the players are going to have more agency. The players are going to have more power under a first time head coach, naturally speaking. But I think the Bills seem to be willing to let Josh Allen and the boys have a little bit more. I want to talk about Zach Benson real quick because there's a report out today from Kevin Weeks, the ESPN analyst and former NHL goalie. He says that the Sabres are working closely towards a contract extension for Zach Benson that would be 7 years and $7 million plus per season. And it got me to thinking, who is the number two Buffalo sports personality in terms of fans and who they're into and who they're behind? after Josh Allen. And I think Zach Benson's in the conversation based on the way he has played ever since he joined the Sabres, not just this season or in the postseason, but he's always had that edge to him. He got a bit of folk hero status in this playoff run. The teammate that you love on your team and the opponents hate playing against, and the Sabres haven't really had that guy probably since, I don't know, Steve Ott or Patrick Coletta, somebody like that. Um, and here is this guy who's productive and fun and has a great backstory and is undersized and overachiever and plays above his weight. And I just want to see, Jonah, what names would you throw out there for? It's clear that Josh Allen far and away, but who's number two on that list?
Well, before I give you some names, I want to say that Zach Benson's an excellent candidate in terms of being maybe the most popular Sabre coming out of that playoff run for his style of play and his personality. Uh, a first round draft pick who's still developing his offensive game, but is becoming more and more of an offensive player and could very well be the most popular Sabres player in seasons to come, even more popular than he is right now. But that's the assumption that if Josh Allen's the most popular athlete in Buffalo, that the most popular Sabres player is automatically number two. I don't know if you can really make that assumption
No, I'm not
or,
saying that.
well, right. But I mean, I think this is a conversation I've overheard among media people about where that sliding scale lines up. How many players do you have to go down the Bills roster of the biggest stars in the Bills before you get to the biggest star in the Sabres? Usually it was Tage Thompson against someone like Khalil Shakir. Like Tage Thompson has probably been that biggest star in the Sabres, second biggest star in Buffalo candidate going back for a couple of years now. Alex Tuck, I would put his name into that discussion, especially with his personality and being from the Syracuse area, being a Bills fan, growing up a Sabres fan, going to Bills games. Like, which Sabres player would be the biggest name to bang the drum at the Bills games if they did something like that or lead the charge? It might be Zach Benson, it might be Alex Tuck, it might be Lindy Ruff, might be the most popular Sabre and the
Yeah.
second most popular sporting figure in Buffalo right now.
Well,
Haley
that's where I
Skamura.
think it's kind of, disappointing that you'd have to, and if Rick Jeanneret were still around, it would be probably Rick Jeanneret, but that you would have to include coaches and broadcasters on the list. But that's what happens when you haven't been to the playoffs in 14 years, such as the Sabres. I mean, they used to have those guys. They have in the past anyway. You could go with, those '06, '07 guys. So many of them were popular. Marty Baron, even when they weren't great, he was super popular. Whoever the fighter was, whether it was Rob Ray or the Danny Briere and Drury, the whole thing. Ryan Miller, Brian Campbell. But now it's kind of a discussion, and so my guess would be Rasmus Dahlin. And we talked about it on the WGR show, and Brad Ryder really pushed back on Dahlin. Dahlin, his story. He's one of the elite defensemen in the NHL. Fans were upset that he didn't win the Masterton, which I was kind of surprised that he didn't. He's a captain. He was a finalist for the Norris Trophy. I think Tage Thompson and the whole political thing and the MAGA aspect of it rubbed some people the wrong way. And then fans were upset with him during the postseason. I think there were fans who were in the heat of the moment were done with Tage Thompson just a few weeks ago. Same with Alex Tuck. So on the Bills, who do you got though? Dion Dawkins, who is beloved by a large segment of the fans, Walter Payton Man of the Year candidate every year. But there's some people who view him as a bit of a cartoon. He's just a little too out there, rubs some people the wrong way in that regard. Not me, but I hear it. Dawson Knox, I mean, he's in a lot of commercials. He's popular. I hear the ladies talk about how handsome he is and all that stuff, but he's your number two tight end. And I don't know, even James Cook, NFL rushing leader, but he's got no personality. He's just doesn't he doesn't pop. He doesn't pop like with not just with the media, but with fans. You never hear about big interactions with the media or with fans out there or whatever. I mean, he doesn't show up for the voluntary workouts. The contract holdout rubs some people the wrong way. So, anyways, I I think it might be Zach Benson if you're talking about just players. Lindy Ruff is obviously up there, but yeah, Used to be maybe Matt Milano, who's not on a roster right now, or a Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, those guys. I don't know. Who is
I
it?
would say it was never Matt Milano because if we're talking personality and there was a popularity to him as a football player, but
Yes.
Matt
Yeah, that's true.
Milano
But he never
fired on those
upset
posts.
anybody. Yeah, he had no personality, but the fact that he had no personality was his personality. James Cook doesn't have that. There was a weird mystery about Matt Milano,
Yeah.
and he was a playmaker. And again, I always hear the ladies talk about, drooling over Matt Milano. Um, but
Uh,
the playmaker aspect of it, the fact that he didn't talk added to his legend. And if he were able to stay on the field and be healthy, I think Matt Milano might be the answer to this question.
James Cook does have those commercials with William Mattar and
That's
the
right.
connection with the number
And
four. And look,
Picasso's Pizza.
a large part of this is performance on the field or on the ice. Even with Zach Benson, Zach Benson's been the same, you know, type of player, style of player, and personality all season long, but his popularity really didn't explode until the playoffs, that spotlight. But with him producing points and being a factor in wins and losses like he was in the postseason.
And big
And the
moments
second,
too. When the Sabres needed a play and it happened, he was usually involved in some way, whether it
right.
be physically or with the assist or maybe even scoring the goal himself.
Yes. And I mean, these are two or three different ranking systems blended together. Like who is the second biggest star on the Bills? We can't even really agree on that. On-field performance-wise, coming off of last year, probably is James Cook, but does he get penalized for having a quieter personality? Deion Dawkins, at times, he's a Pro Bowl player. He might be considered the second best on-field player on the Buffalo Bills, second most important at a very important position, and he's probably the biggest, most outsized personality of anybody in this discussion, Josh Allen included. But now I'm thinking more and more about the Sabres. I think the top stars on the Sabres rank higher against these top stars on the Bills more than I would have thought. Tage Thompson, this is more on ice performance, but his scoring ability and having the hardest shot, one of the hardest shots in the NHL, year after year, I think he ranks pretty highly. Alex Tuck, we already talked about. Rasmus Dahlin, he is the best player on the team. He is the captain. He also won the Rick Martin uh, Memorial Award trophy this year, a team fan voted team award as basically the most popular player on the team. That had been Alex Tuck for 3 straight years going into this past season when Rasmus Dahlin won that award. So he should probably be pretty high in this discussion. And it does feel like, the 53rd player on the Buffalo Bills is probably a bigger name value than Jordan Greenway or some player on the Buffalo
Right.
Sabres, maybe. I don't know where you really line those up, but NFL and the Bills have outsized popularity compared with the Sabres, even in this hockey town. But I think the top Sabres rank higher against the top Bills than I would have assumed or would have been the case before this season and this playoff run and the way the Sabres really revived that fan base and revived their popularity within the city sporting landscape.
Well,
And
that's
you
why
wouldn't
you
put
lock. No, go ahead.
the other thing is there a non-Bills or a non-Sabres athlete that's even in the discussion? Jessica Pagula, does she count? Is that even someone you would consider? And is there anybody else from any sport
Red hot Joe Mack
whatsoever?
from Williamsville East.
Sure, there you
Hit
go.
his first home run earlier this month in the majors, and then he went 4 for 4. The guy's been on a tear for the last 3 weeks. Raised his batting average by 30 some points.
I'll give
He's
you a
not
name.
striking out as much. He's walking. What?
Well, go on. No, go on with Joe Mack, and then
No,
I'll
no,
give
that's
you
that's all I had.
but this is just a sarcastic name. But
Who
how
was
about
I missed
William
it? Who'd you say?
Fichtner? Bill Fichtner
Oh,
throwing out
Bill.
the first pitch at the Bison's game Saturday night, banged the drum at the Sabres game. What has he done for the Bills? So, more than we can name here.
How about Doug
He,
Allen?
yeah, sure. How about Cammy Clune?
Right. Um, all right. Well, the answer might be Zach
Uh,
Benson.
yeah, I do think it's a little bit premature, maybe, to give that title to Zach Benson right away. I think he's on that track, but there's more established players on his own team and probably more established stars in Buffalo on either of the teams that should have an argument.
Right. Jonah, that's all I have. Anything you wanted to add?
You want to talk a little bit about the trade the Sabres made and the trades they might make, and going into we might not do
Yeah, it was
anything
kind of
again
a
before the draft.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a blip for me, but yeah, we can talk about it. Of course, Kesselring going for essentially 7 spots up in the draft. The Sabres go from 27th to 20th, which could be a precursor move, trying to move up a little bit to get an asset that looks better in a trade. Because let's face it, who wants 27? But maybe you can entice somebody with 20th overall. There's the Bo Byram um, smoke that's out there that teams maybe are poking around about Bo Byram. No, I'll leave it with you, Jonah. Where do you think this Rubik's cube is regarding these rumors slash moves, and does it foretell anything? And does it mean anything for Alex Tuck, do you think?
Well, let's get there. I do think the Michael Kesseling trade, they move up 7 spots in the first round. I don't have the NHL draft chart memorized, but from what I've read and heard, that's about a mid to late second round pick value, which is pretty good return. I think that's what the Sabres traded for Beck Malenstein. It's less than what they gave up to get Ryan McLeod, more than they gave up to get a player like Jordan Greenway. But that's something as an addition to Josh Doan in getting for JJ Peterka. They didn't get the season they
Wait,
wanted
just
out of Michael Kesselring.
real quick. So you're saying moving up 7 spots is the equivalent of gaining a second round pick? Is
That's the
that what you're
way I've
saying?
heard it and
Okay.
read it and understood it. Yeah, roughly.
All right. Got it. Sorry.
NHL draft picks aren't worth in those rounds
Right.
aren't worth the same as NFL draft picks. It's a different type of thing. It's also different from the NBA or anything really else to compare it to. But that's why I'm saying the Sabres aren't selecting a player in the second round of this draft based on this trade. That value, if that's the case, is roughly Beck Malenstein value on top of getting Josh Doan for JJ Peterka in that deal a year ago. Not getting the season you wanted out of Michael Kesselring, but still getting some value in offloading him because, restricted free agent, arbitration eligible, and falling down the depth chart, I think maybe didn't have a future on this team or, a bright future on this team, and getting that much value for him, I think is pretty good. Now, coupled with rumors that, reports that the Sabres might be entertaining a trade of Bowen Byram. When the Sabres traded for Michael Kesselring a year ago, he was slotted in as a top four defenseman, didn't really foresee Matthias Samuelsson regaining his game and moving into the top pair the way he did, but also uncertainty over Bowen Byram, whether he would be on this team. He was going into restricted free agency. The rumors and the reports seem to indicate more likely that the Sabres were going to trade his rights than bring him back or get, an offer sheet for him and get draft picks back for him. They end up doing a 2-year bridge deal. But at that time, it was thought this is a 1-year deal and the Sabres are going to trade the asset a year from now. That wasn't always the Sabres plan, but that was the analysis a year ago of what the Sabres might have been planning. So now we're at that point. Jarmo Kekalainen has said he wants to sign Bowen Byram to a long-term deal, but Bowen Byram's in a position where he's probably better off playing this out and going to unrestricted free agency next year. And the Sabres have a decision to make, and part of making that decision is gauging Bowen Byram's trade value. What can they get for him now? What teams are interested in him now? That might set his market and compensation at the trade deadline. If the Sabres are in a position where they feel like that's the right move to make then, or they could trade him now if they really like the return, and that makes it easier for them to re-sign Alex Tuck, or gives them more flexibility to do something else with the roster, or just asset management if they like the value that they get back. But Bowen Byram became a very important part of this team. The strength of the team was those top four defensemen without Michael Kesselring, part of what made him expendable. And coupled with this extension for Zach Benson, which seems like a good deal, a good value. It's a lot of money considering Zach Benson's production and his age, but with his draft status and the cap going up, it's pretty much the same deal they gave to Josh Doan. It seems like a good deal for the Sabres. I think they're happy with when they do get him locked up, locking him up. And there might need to be additional cap creation or moves to make in order to afford signing Alex Tuck, or they lose Alex Tuck. But I think losing Alex Tuck and losing Bowen Byram from this team really changes the complexion of why they won and got to the playoffs.
Yeah,
And there
that's a
would be a
lot of
lot more.
leadership
Right,
gone.
right. So there's a lot more work to be done to replace both of those players in the lineup if that's the direction the Sabres go in, which is why I don't think Bowen Byram gets traded now, but the conversations might lead to something happening down the line, depending how things play out.
Yeah, the draft is upon us, and as the draft gets closer, these deals start getting made. So interesting things that even though it is the slow season, some Sabres things will be happening here in the next week or so.
Well,
Um,
and the draft itself will be happening here in the next week or
right, I
so,
was just
which
going to ask
isn't,
you, are you
yeah.
covering that?
Well, that's a little bit of up for discussion and figuring out how much time to spend downtown with the NHL draft when the Sabres will be at the Bills facility where their war room will be. So it might be an aspect of covering the pregame festivities before the draft and Toronto making the first pick and things like that, and then going up to the stadium and covering the rest of the draft from the Bills facility where the Sabres will be. For the fans, they don't get to go to the war room or anything like that. So I think for hockey fans, you'll want to be downtown and experience the NHL draft and the different activities going on outside, or stay home and watch it on television if you'd rather do that.
Watch it in a bar if you wanted the communal thing. I mean, I don't know what the NHL does in terms of the draft things outside the arena. I've always found that I covered 7 NHL drafts, I guess 6 because of the lockout one year. There was no draft. Um, and it is just boring as hell. And this is when I covered it, the teams were all there. So you would get a chance to talk to uh I'm not talking about the media standpoint, but the fans, you would be able to look down on the arena floor and see Cam Neely and the versions who they'd be now. Chris Drury of the Rangers and Steve Yzerman and well back in the day Wayne Gretzky because he was coach of the Coyotes or Mario Lemieux owner of the Penguins, and you'd be able to see these people. And now they're not even there; they're in their own markets. And so you sit around and there's a bunch of kids in suits with their families waiting for their name to be heard, and occasionally well, at the end of it, sometimes you see a lot of kids walking out in their suits and they weren't picked. But anyways, it's after the first couple of picks, you're going to be looking around saying, "We came down here for this." But
Well,
anyways, I just find it
it's
pretty
going to be
boring.
it's a different event than it was 10 years ago when the Sabres hosted the draft and Austin Matthews was the number one pick for Toronto Maple Leafs. Last year was the first decentralized draft, I believe, or the first in this era of doing it. And the NHL seemed to try to do a lot of things to entertain the crowd and even the television audience and make up for the fact that the teams weren't there and it wasn't the traditional event that it used to be. That wasn't always well received, at least back here in Buffalo watching it. People thought the broadcast dragged on, but maybe that makes it more fun and entertaining for the people that buy tickets. And I'm assuming that everyone in the building is going to be a Maple Leafs fan just there for the moment
Right.
of the Maple Leafs making the number one
That's
pick
true.
with
There's
Devin
that
McKenna.
aspect of it.
Um,
If you're a local and you want to go check out this event, you're going to have to put up with all the Leafs fans.
and probably a lot of Canadians who are junior hockey league fans watching the players that they know get drafted because it's still a big moment for those people. Like, I'm curious. I'll probably be more preoccupied with what the Sabres are doing and covering that, but I am a little bit curious, what mix of fans are there in the arena and what they're experiencing and enjoying about the NHL draft.
Yeah. All right, Jonah. Thanks. And thanks to everybody out there for watching/listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. Please give us a like, subscribe, comment, and support Homage because supporting Homage supports Tim Graham and Friends. Jonah has his NWO Homage shirt on. Of course,
Hmm.
I'm going with the Aki Hall related version. We got this Knicks gear I mentioned earlier, Bills stuff on there, Major League Baseball, all kinds of TV shows, pop culture, Disney, Marvel, DC, Star Wars, all kinds of stuff there at the site. We thank you for those who do support us through that and for giving us your time and being a part of our audience.